The International Space Station has a problem that looks boring on paper, but keeps flight controllers awake at night. Air is leaking out of a part of the Russian segment. The leak has been getting worse over the past few years, and no one can say with confidence that they understand the root cause. Metal can be inspected, seals can be replaced, but an unexplained pattern of cracks in a pressure vessel orbiting about 400 kilometers above Earth is not something you shrug off between public relations statements. The story centers on a narrow corridor that links the Zvezda service module to visiting Progress cargo ships. Progress vehicles bring food, fuel, and equipment, and their engines regularly fire to raise the station's orbit.
The data doesn't lie.
Around 2019, fine cracks began appearing in that tunnel. Engineers tried patching and sealant, measuring the leak rate before and after. By early 2024, that loss had climbed to several pounds per day. A small number only until you remember that every kilogram of gas up there was paid for in launch mass and must remain within a narrow pressure band for crews to stay healthy. Because the space station is an international project, the diagnosis and messaging are split between agencies. Russian officials announced that the leak had been sealed after repair work in 2025. They reported that the pressure inside the corridor had stabilized. NASA echoed some of that optimism in public, careful not to pick a fight with a key partner. Yet, internal data still showed the overall cabin pressure for the entire station trending downward. A slow, persistent slope that did not match the happy narrative. From that mismatch came a simple, uncomfortable theory. The metal corridor might indeed still be cracked, and the hatch meant to isolate it could also be leaking around its seals. In that scenario, air from the main station would continue to bleed into the suspect tunnel through the imperfect door. The pressure sensor in the tunnel would read stable, giving the illusion that the repair worked, while the system as a whole kept losing atmosphere. On a diagram, it looks obvious. Main volume, faulty hatch, damaged module. In real hardware with complex structures and decades of history, it is harder to prove. NASA tracks threats with a 5x5 risk matrix. One axis is likelihood from rare to frequent. The other is consequence from minor to catastrophic. The leak in the Russian segment has been placed in the worst category on both axes. That does not mean the station is about to explode. It means the combination of ongoing air loss, aging hardware, and uncertain cause leaves almost no margin for complacency. A pressure shell can tolerate a slow leak if you understand exactly where it is and how it behaves. It becomes unacceptable when you cannot be sure which crack will grow next. The underlying physics is high cycle fatigue in metal. Imagine bending a wire coat hanger. As you keep working the same spot back and forth, the metal hardens, then suddenly snaps. The modules of the station are aluminum structures that have experienced tens of thousands of cycles of heating and cooling as they move in and out of sunlight every 90 minutes. They flex during dockings, thruster firings, and even minor changes in internal pressure. The Zvezda module that anchors this corridor was originally built in the late 1980s as backup hardware for the Mir station, which itself was never meant to last more than about a decade in orbit. When the International Space Station began permanent operations in 2001, its design lifetime was projected to reach about 20 years. That target has already been pushed to at least 2030, with talk of stretching further if the hardware and budgets allow. Each extension carries a hidden tax. The longer the structure lives, the more unknown stress cycles accumulate in places that are difficult to inspect. The first truly modular station, Mir, suffered from leaks, fires, and computer failures before it was finally deorbited in 2001 and steered into the Pacific. The current leaks in Zvezda are a reminder that the ISS is built on the same design lineage. Inside control rooms on the ground, nobody treats this as a movie plot. Teams track the pressure every day, correlate drops with known operations, and run models of how long the onboard air reserves would last under various leak rates. They have playbooks for closing hatches, reconfiguring ventilation, and prioritizing compartments if an isolated section had to be abandoned. Delays to crewed launches, including private tourist flights, are not driven by drama. They are a cold response to a risk score landing in the red. The communication to the public, on the other hand, is cautious to the point of being incomplete. Agencies do not like announcing structural uncertainties, especially when a partner nation controls the affected hardware. There are diplomatic considerations, classification rules, and a natural desire to avoid sparking headlines about an unstable space station that could frighten taxpayers and families of astronauts. The result is a gap between what engineers worry about in internal documents and what casual space fans hear in official press releases. That gap is where speculation thrives. Without numbers, people fill the silence with assumptions about cover-ups and imminent disasters. Yet the mechanics behind the situation are not mysterious. An aging module built for a different era is showing its age. A complex joint between segments developed cracks that are hard to reach and hard to monitor. Sealing it completely is tricky when the station has to keep operating. With cargo ships coming and going on a regular schedule and political pressure to maintain a human presence on board, it helps to place this in the bigger picture of the station's end-of-life planning. NASA and its partners have already accepted that the ISS will not fly forever. Current planning assumes a controlled deorbit early in the next decade, using attached propulsion to guide the complex into a remote stretch of ocean. To retire the station gracefully, new habitats, likely built by commercial companies under contract, will have to be ready to pick up at least some of the scientific and symbolic workload. Money for those projects comes from the same pool as ISS maintenance, new moon missions, and Earth observation satellites. While this old hardware absorbs attention, one of NASA's most successful recent projects operates far from low Earth orbit. The James Webb Space Telescope, parked near a gravitational balance point about 1.5 million kilometers from Earth, observes deep space and infrared light. Its segmented gold mirror has already rewritten textbooks on galaxy formation and starbirth. More quietly, it has also begun to resolve individual exoplanets that would have been effectively invisible just a few years ago. One recent observation involved a planet orbiting a star around 60 light-years away. The planet is cold and dim, with an average temperature near the freezing point of water, far less radiant than the hot Jupiter-type giants that dominated early exoplanet imaging. Ordinarily, such a world would be completely washed out by the glare of its host star. In this case, the orbit is tilted in such a way that, during part of its path, the planet sits slightly off the line of sight, making it easier to isolate with careful coronography and a large mirror. From a single carefully processed image, astronomers could extract information about the planet's atmosphere. The spectrum showed signatures of carbon dioxide, an important milestone because it was the first time that gas had been directly identified in the atmosphere of such a faint exoplanet. By comparing models of temperature and composition, the team inferred strong vertical mixing, with molecules transported from warmer depths into colder upper layers. The picture that emerges is of a frigid world whipped by energetic winds, more stormy than serene despite its low equilibrium temperature. There are no dramatic live streams, no booming narration about secrets revealed. A team spends months reducing noisy data, arguing over calibration, checking their assumptions, and only then publishes a careful paper. The payoff is knowledge that will still matter 10 years from now, not a spike of online outrage that fades in a day. Against the background of aging aluminum on the ISS, Webb's clean cryogenic optics are a reminder of what happens when a mission launches near the peak of technology instead of limping past its intended retirement date. Back on Earth, another thread of the future is taking shape on concrete pads rather than in quiet, dark space. A relatively small company called Stoke Space is developing a rocket called Nova that aims for full reusability in both stages. Instead of trying to catch a returning stage with a giant tower, their upper stage is designed as a kind of flying stainless steel saucer with a ring of 24 small combustion chambers arranged around its base and an active heat shield cooled from within. The idea is to route super-cold liquid hydrogen propellant through channels directly beneath the outer skin of the vehicle before it reaches the engine nozzles. During ascent, that flow chills the metal. During re-entry, the stored cold and continuous flow help the shield survive the intense heating without ablative tiles or bulky blankets. The ring of engines can gimbal independently, providing control authority for both ascent and vertical landing. It is an elegant integration of structure, propulsion, and thermal protection. But it also means that every leak, every weld defect, and every manufacturing tolerance can have 2 or 3 different consequences. Stoke follows a hardware-rich philosophy similar to the one SpaceX made famous with Starship. Instead of spending many years on a small number of highly polished prototypes, they build and test frequently, except that some units will fail and learn from those failures. Early hot fires took place behind a shipping container. More recent tests run on dedicated stands with thrust levels and burn durations approaching what will be needed for flight. The company has publicly talked about attempting multiple launches in a single year, an ambitious schedule that only works if the vehicles can be turned around quickly and repaired with minimal fuss. The contrast between these 3 strands of the current space era is sharp. The ISS represents legacy infrastructure, stretched well beyond its original design horizon, carrying the weight of politics and habit. James Webb showcases what happens when a complex machine performs almost exactly as intended, delivering clean data and revolutions in understanding. Stoke Space and other reusable rocket teams embody a newer attitude: move fast, iterate, and accept that scorched metal on the pad is part of progress, not necessarily a scandal. For outsiders trying to make sense of all this, the key is to care more about numbers and methods than about narrative tone. A leak rate expressed in pounds of air per day, a target deorbit year in a formal planning document, an error bar on an exoplanet spectrum, a published test campaign for a new engine. These are the anchors that separate real risk from free-floating anxiety. When agencies speak softly about serious issues, it is fair to demand more clarity. It is also important to remember that the universe does not adjust its physics to match our favorite thumbnails. The metal on the station will continue to age. The telescope will go on collecting light from distant worlds until its fuel and hardware run down. New rockets will keep exploding on the way to reliability. Somewhere between fear and hype is the actual work. Engineers closing a hatch and checking a pressure gauge, scientists fitting a spectrum with a better model, technicians tightening a line of bolts on a prototype heat shield. Paying attention to that work, and to the concrete details that describe it, is how the picture of space becomes sharper instead of simply louder.
Above the noise of headlines and speculation, the universe remains.